Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, we're going to talk about Harry Maguire deal being totally off, as well as some of the difficulties that United are having right now in moving players out. If the summer is kind of stalled right now, another name for the midfield list that is floating around, the need for a forward, and some of what's going on today. Okay, so obviously yesterday morning, overnight, it started actually prior to the Wolves game, right? It started looking like West Ham were getting quite impatient with Manchester United over the Harry Maguire deal. Since last week, terms have been agreed. To be very clear on this, there's a couple of things. Number one, one thing that was made clear was that Harry Maguire never spoke with David Moyes and West Ham, and that is totally true. But people around him did, and so it's one of those things. The player rarely speaks to the team until very late on in the process when they're at the final stage, but they have people around them, including his brother and others, who were in contact with West Ham about the move and had opened up the discussion in terms of his willingness to move. However, obviously there was two main issues holding it up. Number one was the severance package from Manchester United to Harry Maguire that he was due, and number two was replacement. There's a lot of focus on number one, which is that severance package, as being the reason why this deal has fallen through. But Manchester United, they kind of do go hand in hand. United bought Harry for 80 million 6 years ago, right? And that means they're paying, or they have on their books, about 13 million a year for Harry Maguire. And with 2 years left on his contract, that means they still owe about 26 2/3 million pounds for Maguire. If they sell him for 30 million pounds like they agreed with West Ham, and they've got to make a 10 million payoff, then in terms of a replacement, they've got to get someone of similar value, or they are taking from where they can spend elsewhere. And both of these things are a factor. I happily take it and say, look, Harry, you should have, foregone some of the money and taken a move. I think you should have. I think that he should have taken less money and pushed for this move to get out the door, to go play and be a starter week in and week out at West Ham. I think he should have. Is it the wrong mentality to stay at United? If it's just about the money, then 100% it's the wrong mentality to stay at United. If he genuinely thinks that he could earn his place back at United, that's a different story, even if it seems rather unlikely to everybody else. So it's easy to take this and say we want to blame one person for this situation, but there's a few factors. First and foremost, which is, to me, United did not want to buy a new center back this summer. 2 weeks ago, we heard from myself, other people who were very reliable, that Harry did want to stay at United and find his and fight for his place. And since maybe March, I've been saying, look, I don't think we're going to sign a center back this summer. I don't think it's the deal. The offer that came in for Harry that was acceptable, that United looked at, made them say, okay, well, if he wants to go and we're going to make this sale, then we'll look at a center back. But think about it for a minute. Look at the right center backs that United have let go this summer. Kim Min-jae, they made no move for. Jurrien Timber, one of Erik ten Hag's favorite players from Ajax, let him go to Arsenal. Didn't compete for him after kind of looking at a deal last summer. So that should tell you United were not really looking at the right center back market for this summer. And it was interesting because I a few weeks ago, if you recall, I was talking about the names of center backs, and they're all left-footed ones. We have been scouting right-footed ones. Silva from Portugal is on the list for the long term. But I was hearing names like Ignacio, and some other name. Gosh, now I can't remember off the top of my head. It doesn't really matter. And I said, maybe this will be for next summer. And I think it will be. When you look at the team overall, it looks to me like goalkeeper, striker, midfielder, maybe another midfielder. Next summer, what are you trying to address? Center back depth and maybe right back, depending on how it goes with Wan-Bissaka and Dalot, and that's where all the focus will be. We bought Lisandro Martinez last year. We bought Varane the year before. We bought a lot of center backs, and just kind of the way that things go with United. So there's two parts to this. Number one is, the costs of having Harry Maguire depart are a lot. It is money he's owed. Anyone can argue it isn't. I'm not saying he shouldn't have foregone that money, that he shouldn't have pushed for a move to West Ham to play more. I think he should have. That would have been what I would have done. That would have been, it's easy to say that. That's, from my perspective, what he should have done. Let's put it that way. I don't think that's what I would have done is a good statement when you're not in that kind of position and talking about foregoing £9 million. That's a hell of a lot of money. But from my side, I would have said, yes, he should have gone, and it is easy to say that. But a big factor as well, and it is a factor, it's not a BS reason. It's the reason that David Ornstein said the deal was off. And something that I understand is as well to be true and have mentioned is about replacement. And, that's a challenge because, obviously the names that were coming out most significantly was Benjamin Pavard. And they approached him over a right back earlier in the year. He wanted to play center back. Now he comes up as a center back. And you're thinking, okay, what I was told was United would not want to go over 25 to 30 million euros for him. Why? Because they don't want to spend so much that, one, it's going to detract from what they can spend elsewhere. And two, is he good enough? Is he Varane's long-term replacement? Let's look at this for a minute. Let's say you buy Benjamin Pavard, and then next summer, Benjamin Pavard is okay, and Varane is kind of slowing down a little bit. Don't you want Varane to become the backup right center back? Let's say you can't rely on his fitness altogether that much. Wouldn't you want Varane to be the rotation? Isn't that usually the best way that your starters, as they get a little older, they start to push down into rotation? Isn't that the best way where you're not constantly wasting money? You get your starter to push down into rotation and you buy a new starter. We've been talking about that for a long time on this channel and on many platforms. You do not buy depth players. You buy starters and you push your starters to depth. And that's how you build a really strong team. And then you buy young players who could become depth in the future. You buy under 21s who can become depth, and you buy starters. And you kind of go on either end. You don't buy the mid-tier kind of players. And I think they've done a good job of that. Buying Højlund, who's set to be the starter in the long term. Buying Mason Mount as a starter. Buying Onana as a starter. Casemiro, Antony. Whether all the signings work out, it's been the right idea that they've been buying mostly starting level players to push other players into depth. You buy Mount, pushes Fred down, you sell him. You buy someone else, it pushes someone down. Now you can buy depth once the depth gets kind of weak, like we're seeing in the midfield, but at the same time, and we'll get to this is part of that whole discussion. Do you buy Onana, who you think could be a starter, or do you buy Amrabat depth? Well, I think if you can, you buy the starter, right? But this is the problem with right center back. It'd be better to sell Maguire, even for 15 million next year. There's no difference to FFP because it's going down by about 13 million a year. If they sell for 15 next year, it's no difference except the payoff is smaller too. So if you sell Maguire next season and you buy a right center back of starting quality, you have a much better team in the long term, and you don't have Deadwood and you don't get this glut of players. And the same for left center back. You want to buy when you're ready to replace Lindelof. So anyway, that's my view. That's how I see it. At the same time, a super ambitious club would potentially be looking at that first choice center back this summer, but the thing is, I think that the biggest factor here is people are more desperate to see Maguire go than anything else because we don't really need a right center back replacement right now. That's all. Eric Bailly also, at the moment, his move is broken down. He was in talks over termination. He wants United to pay him a bunch of money. They don't want to. I kind of get it. It's frustrating, but it's sort of like there's certainly an attempt to change a little bit of the culture of like allowing players just to get away with things, like, Anyway, I think Bailly will still end up off before the end of the summer because he's not even allowed to be with the first team right now or approved to be with the first team right now. So is what it is. Let's move on to the next section, the sell to buy section. United quite obviously need to move someone on to sell anymore. And, one thing obviously on the entire backdrop of all these conversations is, there's a lot of pushed debate or forced debate. Is Murtaugh doing a good job? Is Murtaugh doing a bad job? And when I talk on here, I'm talking from the perspective of what's possible and what's there. So when I say sell to buy, do United need to sell to buy? No, but we're talking about the backdrop of the Glazers still owning the club and setting the parameters. And that's where a conversation becomes kind of pointless, because if one wants to argue, we're Manchester United, we don't have to sell to buy, okay, then we might as well not discuss anything. What I'm discussing and the information I'll give is within the confines of the Glazers, because that's the reality of the situation, even if it shouldn't be. And when I talk about John Murtaugh, part of the situation is it's within the confines of the Glazers. What he can do is within the confines of the Glazers. He didn't give Maguire a contract. He didn't give Bailly a contract. He doesn't even approve the sales. At the end of the day, it all still has to be signed up from the top. And, Laurie Whitwell put out a great article from The Athletic, interviewing Colette Roche and Rick McGaw, who had the pleasure of meeting in Las Vegas, organized one of the events. And Rick said some nice things, which is one of the points I'd make, because he used to be on the fan advisory board as a part of one of the fan groups, saying, I thought I could do a lot more to help on the inside than the outside. That's a lot of what I've been trying to say is the point. I think that by having a good relationship with the club, you can improve things. And I think it has been helping. But the reason I brought this up is, it was really interesting because they indicated still that Joel Glazer has to sign off on absolutely everything. And so the debate over this or that or the other about who's doing a good job is sort of pointless while that's still ongoing. There's progress this summer. 3 starters in, good players, good profiles, letting players like De Gea go, letting players like Jones go, starting to sell youth, selling Elanga. These are players that in the past would have been, their values would have been held on to, right, for ages and ages and ages and ages for whatever reason. And they're not. And so I know that there's been a push from Ten Hag and Murtaugh to go in the right direction, and it's incremental progress, but it's still under the backdrop of Joel Glazer approves everything except one thing, which is, it's kind of amazing when you look at this. And someone pointed it out to me, and I pointed this out to me, and I thought, wow, yeah, that just shows you who you're dealing with. He signs off on everything, has to approve everything, except one thing, Mason Greenwood. He's palmed that off entirely, according to this report. Given it entirely. Richard Arnold, you deal with it. You deal with the fallout. You deal with the backlash. You deal with all of it. And that should tell you who you're dealing with. And that should tell you kind of the problem at Manchester United, and that it's still present. Everything has to run through Joel Glazer. Except when it's something like Mason Greenwood that's actually very hard to deal with, has a lot of potential backlash. Then he doesn't want to be involved in a decision. Someone else's problem. So we can discuss Murtaugh. People can debate all that shit all they want. You know what the problem is. And I mean, it's not even Richard Arnold at the end of the day. Like, Richard Arnold's the guy that's got to deal with all of this because the owners don't want to. But they're still going to ask to sign off on everything else. Anyway, rant over on that. Within the confines of this summer, United need to sell to buy now. They need to move somebody out. And one of the things that Murtaugh and such have done well is moving these youth players, because that money has a huge effect. Kovar for 5 million is a 25 million euro purchase. Elanga for 15 funds a lot of money. The sales they've made this summer in terms of profit, if you actually look at it from an FFP perspective, there's about 30 million in profit they've made this summer. That's 150 million euros. That's close to all the purchases that they've made. Now, wages and things are another factor, but they've let go of De Gea, let go of Jones. In actual fact, at the moment, from an FFP perspective, all the spending this summer has effectively been evened out. Maybe they've gone a little bit over, right, by maybe 30 or 40 million. But a sale of like an Alvaro Fernandez with a buyback and a sell-on clause, which is the rumor, for 7 million euros or something like that, adds 35 million to the pot of what could be spent under FFP. And that's simplistic terms, but it's actually the truth. McTominay would add a massive amount, and that's one where I think they should sell him. But I believe that Everton closed door game was a bit of putting some players in the shop window. Um, if you look at all the players who played, Fernandez, McTominay, Van de Beek, Gore, Martial, Hannibal, Palistri, as far as I understand it, also played actually, as well as some others, then you're looking at it and saying, we might be looking at, can we find some buyers? Can we find some movements for these? Because if we can't make big sales, if we can make a lot of little sales, it allows us to spend a lot more money. And they need to do something before they can do something else, like Amrabat, Onana, etc. Right? So they need to do something still, and they're still working on all of these. A sale of Fernandez might be enough. It might be enough. In terms of the midfield, one of the names that's obviously coming up again today from Santi is Ryan Gravenberch. United have obviously been linked very much in the past. They tried to buy Ryan Gravenberch years ago. I think he was represented by Mino Raiola way back when, and the relationship was really poor, and that didn't work out. Unless I'm thinking of the right person, right? He was previously represented by them. Let me just look at that because God, I hope I'm not getting confused with someone else. Yeah. He was, yeah. They were looking at him years ago, and he was represented by Mino Raiola before he passed. And you know, and then obviously he's played at Ajax under Ten Hag, so it's a link that's there that has some history even before Ten Hag, but certainly under Ten Hag. And one of the things I was told in April, I tweeted that out and I retweeted it today just for visibility's sake, and I put an update a while ago on it, was that I don't know how interested United currently are or were in Ryan Gravenberch, but he was interested in them. And he had asked his agent to see if he could get a move to United, probably because he wanted to rejoin Ten Hag and figured if he did, he'd play. Now, I understood him to be more of an alternate to someone like Mason Mount. I don't trust that profile of player to be a deep player. I don't think he is. I think it's similar to Donny Van de Beek. You'd see some of those issues show. But it's obviously one to keep an eye on because of prior interest and links to Ten Hag and the fact that the player does, in fact, would want to join United. I would just keep an eye on it. But obviously, Liverpool are currently sort of the more active, it looks like. It was a little odd because the article from Santi said both. His tweet specifically called out Liverpool as reactivating their interest and making contacts this week. It seems like it's more active on Liverpool front, but there's potential certainly that United's name are being brought back up into it to kind of draw them in or create competitive tension with Liverpool over the signing. So I just keep an eye on that one. In terms of the striker forward, I was given some information in the last couple of days, which is that basically since the Wolves game, and not just since, but before that, Erik Ten Hag yesterday made it extremely clear, just in the last 24 hours, 48 hours, he needs another forward. He really, really needs another forward. Palistri is only staying around because he doesn't have the numbers at the moment. He's set to go on loan as soon as they can. That's what they want right now, and that's what looks like will happen. But because they're so short on numbers, Erik Ten Hag needs another forward. He's demanding another forward. Obviously, that ties in the Greenwood situation. He expected to have him back by now in terms of some things that were said, as I hear it. He expected to have him for preseason. But he expected to have him back by now to be getting fit. Obviously, it would take time and all of that. And either way, he's saying, look, I need another forward in. I need someone in because we do not have enough players in the forward line. We still do not have enough goals. And even when Højlund comes back, we don't have enough proven players. It's like I said, you look at it, you have Marcus Rashford and Antony, who are the only two players at Manchester United right now who are regular starters last year and had kind of nailed down a place. And Antony is even questionable. Some of that is simply because he's the only player who fits that. His performances have been not that good at many points in time. Garnacho, as we can see, is a really, really talented player. And he will make it, and he will be exceptional. He had a bad game against Wolves, as did a lot of other players. But he had a bad game against Wolves, but he's still, when he starts, that tends to be the issue, is not yet having figured out playing within the team so much as when he has his strengths, using his speed, athleticism, etc. against tired legs, he succeeds a lot better. So we don't have a lot of starters, and Jadon Sancho, as we know, great preseason. I'm pretty sure he'll start the next game, but he hasn't nailed down a starting spot either. There's not a lot of proven forwards in that team still. And that was why so many people were like, hey, we need like a real striker in. And the delay with Højlund obviously exacerbates this issue. But Erik ten Hag needs another forward, and he wants one, and he's pushing for it. So just keep an eye on that situation, because it's either going to force the issue with Greenwood, or something's going to have to give. Something's going to have to happen there, because he's demanding it. And that goes on with today. You know, the schedule for this week is going to be, you know, the day after the game. There's obviously the closed door Everton game. There was the and then for the other players, there's usually like a wind down or a recovery day the day after a game. Then it'll be either light training or a day off for a number of players today. Maybe the players who played on Tuesday, I'm not sure. We'll have some of them have a day off today. And I believe that there's set to be some meetings today to make some certain decisions, because they need to decide, you know, there's 2 weeks left in the window, and they need to decide what to do now. If it doesn't look like we're moving on a center back, good. What can we do in the midfield, and do we have to get a player out to do it? Do we have offers? Is there anything that can happen? These final decisions have to get made so that over the next 2 weeks, they can just get some deals done. Things needed to happen quickly, mostly between Tuesday and Thursday, because of the registration deadlines. A lot of work can get done on the weekend, but they wanted a midfielder in this week, but the outs have not worked, and it's still kind of stalled, and they're still potentially evaluating a different midfielder. So things are a little up in the air, but there's set to be some more internal discussions today to push things forward. So that's what I've got. A lot of demands from Ten Hag, a lot of demands on what they still need, that ideally they get a couple more players in. There's some tension. There's some things he's unhappy with, because the goal was certainly not to have Dean Henderson around, and was to have another keeper in by now. Not that it could be a bad thing. I just hope the situation doesn't turn badly. The goal was to have, you know, was a week ago, they were very optimistic about moving Maguire out and getting somebody in. Now, obviously not so. And the goal was a week ago that they could get another midfielder out and get a midfielder in this week. And it's dragging a little. And again, this is where the discussion is. There's so many people that could be blamed for this. But rather than pointing the fingers, it just hopefully they can sort it out and deal with it, because there are some challenges. And if it need be that they have to keep moving on youngsters to raise the money for it, because it's hard to shift some of these older players, okay. But hopefully, you know, something good came of that Everton game too, and maybe that'll help put some players in the window. Okay. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on. See you in the next one.